The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as the bailiff called the next case. A young black man named Marcus Walker stepped up, calm and composed in his neatly pressed navy blue suit. He stood alone, representing himself after months of what he described as unjust escalation from a simple traffic stop. Across the aisle, Officer Bradley, broad-shouldered, grinning, and noticeably smug, adjusted his tie as he prepared to testify. He'd written Marcus up for multiple infractions, but many in the gallery could already tell there was something personal about the case for him. As Marcus placed his documents on the table, Officer Bradley scoffed and muttered loud enough to be heard, "He probably Googled his defense last night." A quiet chuckle escaped from a few seats behind. The judge glanced up but said nothing. Marcus didn't flinch. He straightened the papers in front of him and looked at the officer with quiet resolve. Then, with a steady voice, he addressed the court. "Your Honor, before we begin, I would like to place a quick phone call. I believe the outcome of this case hinges on someone who can verify the events firsthand." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You understand this is highly unusual during testimony?" "I do, sir. But I assure you, it'll be relevant." The judge gave a short nod. "You may proceed. Make it brief." Marcus pulled out his phone, dialed a number from memory, and turned on speaker. What followed silenced the room. The courtroom held its breath as the call rang once, twice. Then a crisp, authoritative voice answered on the third ring, "General Thompson speaking." Officer Bradley's smirk faltered instantly. His head snapped toward Marcus, his posture stiffening as if by instinct. Marcus spoke clearly into the speaker. "Sir, this is Marcus Walker. I'm currently in court regarding the incident you witnessed back in February, outside Fort Jackson." There was a brief pause, then the general replied, "I remember it well." "You need me to confirm what I saw?" "Yes, sir." "That would help." General Thompson's voice grew firmer. "Very well. To whomever this concerns, Marcus Walker is a decorated logistics analyst contracted by the Department of Defense. On the day in question, I personally witnessed him being detained without probable cause while en route to deliver secure documents to my office. I intervened immediately because the situation was unacceptable and jeopardized a sensitive operation." The room went dead silent. Officer Bradley's face drained of color. He slowly lowered his head, no longer meeting anyone's gaze. The grin had vanished. Even the judge leaned forward, clearly surprised. Then General Thompson added, "And if you're wondering, yes, I made an official complaint that day. But it seems the message never reached the right ears." Marcus glanced up calmly. Officer Bradley was now standing stiffly, his hands clasped in front of him as if awaiting orders. He was no longer in control of the room. The judge cleared his throat, clearly caught off guard. "General Thompson, this is Judge Ellis presiding. Just to clarify, you were present during the interaction between Mr. Walker and Officer Bradley?" "Yes, Your Honor," came the firm reply. "And I was appalled. Mr. Walker was calm, cooperative, and fully credentialed. The officer involved ignored my identification and continued to question him as if he were a threat. I instructed him to stand down. The courtroom was frozen in place. Officer Bradley stood as if cemented to the floor, his earlier confidence dissolved. Marcus spoke again, calmly but firmly. "I was delivering secure files when I was pulled over. The stop lasted nearly an hour. When General Thompson arrived, I was still outside my vehicle. No explanation, no citation, until after the general left." The judge looked down at his bench, flipping quickly through the file. "There's no mention of any high-ranking military official in this incident report, Officer Bradley," he said sharply. Bradley fumbled for words. I didn't think it was relevant." A voice from the back whispered, "He didn't think a general was relevant." The judge didn't look up. "It is extremely relevant." General Thompson spoke once more through the speaker. "If this court requires a written affidavit, I'll have it sent within the hour. But let me be clear, Marcus Walker's conduct that day was impeccable. What happened to him was unjustified and unbecoming of someone in uniform. With that, the call ended. Silence again. Then, the judge leaned back in his chair, locked eyes with Officer Bradley, and asked quietly, "Is there anything else you'd like to say before I make my ruling?" Officer Bradley's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who'd rehearsed a dozen lines, none of which would survive the weight of what had just unfolded. His eyes darted to the gallery, then back to the floor, his shoulders sagging under invisible pressure. The judge waited a moment, then said curtly, "Very well." He turned his attention to Marcus. "Mr. Walker, I apologize on behalf of this courtroom for what you've had to endure. The evidence presented, including today's testimony, paints a clear picture." He tapped his gavel lightly. "All charges are dismissed. Furthermore, I will be recommending a formal review of Officer Bradley's conduct during and after this incident. It's clear there are discrepancies between his report and what occurred, especially the omission of a senior military witness." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Marcus gave a slow, respectful nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." As he gathered his papers, he looked once at Officer Bradley, who was now standing rigidly, eyes down, lips pressed tight. Gone was the smug grin, the arrogance. All that remained was a man caught in the spotlight of his own choices. Then something unexpected happened. Marcus walked past him, paused for just a second, and said quietly, "One call. That's all it took. Maybe next time, treat people with basic decency, before they have to prove who they are." Bradley didn't respond. He couldn't. As Marcus stepped out into the hallway, sunlight pouring through the courthouse windows, reporters were already gathering. Word had spread fast, someone inside must have leaked what had just happened. Microphones pushed forward, cameras clicked, and a flood of questions erupted. "Mr. Walker, was that really a military general on the phone? Do you plan to sue the department? What would you say to Officer Bradley right now?" Marcus held up a hand, calm and composed. "I'm not here to destroy reputations. I'm here to restore mine. I was humiliated, detained, and treated like I didn't belong, until someone powerful showed up. But the truth is, I belonged the whole time. We all do." The crowd grew quiet. "I wasn't asking for special treatment. I was asking for fairness. For the benefit of the doubt. For a moment of human respect." A few reporters nodded slowly, typing every word. Then Marcus added, "And no, I don't need to sue anyone. The truth did what it needed to today." Back inside the courtroom, Officer Bradley remained frozen in place as the judge exited the bench. A representative from Internal Affairs was already approaching him with a notepad and a serious expression. The tide had turned. And Marcus Walker? He walked down those courthouse steps, phone in hand, shoulders back, no longer defending who he was. He didn't need to. Weeks later, the ripple effect from that courtroom scene was still being felt. The police department quietly placed Officer Bradley on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. His name was no longer whispered with confidence in the precinct hallways, but with caution and regret. Meanwhile, Marcus Walker's story had gone viral. Not because he sought attention, but because his quiet strength struck a nerve across the country. News anchors praised his composure. Military officials confirmed every word of General Thompson's call. Civic leaders began discussions about protocol reform, starting with how people are treated during basic stops. But Marcus? He kept a low profile. He returned to work at the Department of Defense, more respected than ever, and rarely spoke about the incident again. Except once. At a leadership conference weeks later, he was asked what that moment taught him most. He paused, then smiled slightly. People don't change because you yell at them. They change when they realize they were wrong and have nowhere left to hide from the truth. That's what happened in that courtroom. The truth did the work. I just stayed standing. And with that, Marcus Walker walked off stage to a quiet, standing ovation. He hadn't raised his voice once. But he'd been heard everywhere. Months later, Officer Bradley sat quietly across from a review board, stripped of his badge and title pending further departmental action. What had once been a routine case to him had turned into a national conversation, one he couldn't escape. He gave his statement. He expressed regret. But it was too late. Meanwhile, Marcus Walker received a formal letter from the Secretary of Defense, acknowledging his professionalism under pressure and commending his integrity. Attached was an offer, a speaking role in a new government initiative designed to train law enforcement on how to handle high-stress interactions, through the lens of respect, not assumption. Marcus didn't take the offer right away. He waited. And one morning, after rereading the letter, he smiled and picked up the phone. Not to call a general this time. But to say yes. Because while his story had begun in a courtroom filled with disbelief and arrogance, it had turned into something larger, something hopeful. And now, Marcus Walker wasn't just walking away from injustice. He was walking into Change Point 1 year later. A video clip from that now famous courtroom scene became a staple in training rooms across the country. Police academies, federal agencies, even corporate leadership seminars used it to illustrate a single, powerful point: respect shouldn't be earned with rank, it should be given by default. Marcus watched one of those sessions from the back of a packed auditorium. A young cadet approached him afterward, wide-eyed. "Sir, were you really the guy who stood up to that officer with just one phone call?" Marcus chuckled softly. "I didn't stand up with a phone call. I stood up with the truth. The phone just helped everyone else hear it." The cadet nodded slowly, visibly moved. "You made me want to do this job better. Honestly." That was the moment Marcus knew, this was the real win. Not the courtroom victory. Not the headlines. Not even the general's call. But the quiet seed of change planted in someone else, someone who might one day face a choice between ego and empathy. And choose right. Marcus didn't ask for fame. He didn't chase justice with outrage. He simply stayed calm, made the right call, and let the truth walk beside him. Months after his suspension turned permanent, Officer Bradley finally agreed to speak publicly, during a closed-door panel on accountability in law enforcement. He sat before a modest group of officers in training, no uniform, just a folded page in his hands. His voice was quieter than anyone expected. "I laughed at a man who stayed calm while I lost control. I thought authority meant I didn't have to listen. I was wrong." He paused. What shook me wasn't the phone call, it was the fact that he never raised his voice. Never got angry. And still, he walked out with more dignity than I brought into that room. One trainee asked, "If you could go back, what would you do differently?" Bradley looked up, eyes tired but honest. "I'd remember that the badge doesn't make you right. Your actions do." After the session ended, a few officers approached him, not to condemn, but to ask questions, to learn, to do better. And in that small room, a different kind of justice unfolded, not punishment, but humility. Growth. Marcus never heard that speech. He didn't need to. Somewhere along the line, the man who once mocked him had finally started listening. And that was enough. Nearly 2 years to the day since that courtroom moment, Marcus Walker stood on a quiet stage at a leadership summit in Washington, D.C. The audience was a blend of public officials, military leaders, police chiefs, and young professionals. He was the keynote speaker. No flashy entrance. No slideshow. Just Marcus, with that same calm presence he carried in court. He began with a simple sentence: "I didn't plan to become a symbol, I just wanted to be treated like a man." You could hear a pin drop. He spoke not about anger or revenge, but about accountability, communication, and the quiet power of holding the line with dignity. He shared how one moment of restraint, one choice to stay composed, shifted not just a courtroom, but a conversation. And then, to close, he said, "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do, is not prove someone wrong. It's prove yourself right, by staying grounded in who you are. The room stood in silence for a beat. Then, applause erupted. As Marcus stepped down from the stage, a familiar voice met him at the edge of the platform. It was General Thompson. "Still proud of you, son," he said, clasping his shoulder. "Still watching." Marcus smiled. "Still standing." And with that, he walked out into the evening air, not just a man who had endured injustice, but one who turned it into impact. Years later, Marcus Walker's story had become required material, not just for law enforcement or government training, but in classrooms where future leaders were shaped. His case was no longer seen as a rare incident, it had become a blueprint for how to respond when your dignity is tested. One afternoon, Marcus visited a local high school where a teacher had dedicated an entire civics unit to ethics in public service. He didn't go to speak. Just to observe. In the back row, he watched as a student read aloud from an essay titled, "One Call Can Change Everything." The student concluded with, "Mr. Walker didn't just make a phone call, he made a decision not to be reduced by someone else's ignorance." And that's what courage looks like. The teacher noticed Marcus in the room. Her eyes widened, but he just smiled and shook his head gently, signaling, "Let them speak." He didn't need to be known. He needed the message to be remembered. That day, no one asked for selfies or autographs. But 3 students walked out of that class saying they wanted to be public defenders. One wanted to join internal affairs. One asked how to file public records requests. The ripple continued. And Marcus? He walked back to his car, turned the key, and drove off, quiet, steady, and undefeated. 10 years had passed. Marcus Walker no longer worked in government. He'd settled into a quieter life, running a mentorship program for young professionals navigating law, policy, and public service. The organization was small but growing, fueled by one principle that had never left him: stand with dignity, even when no one is watching. One fall evening, after wrapping up a mentorship session, he received a handwritten letter. No return address, just a short, careful message inside: "Mr. Walker, I was the officer in that courtroom. I no longer wear a badge. I now teach new recruits how not to become what I once was. I share your story often, never naming you, only honoring the lesson you taught. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my change. B." Marcus read it twice. Then placed it in a drawer, beneath years of notes, photos, and news clippings he'd long since stopped revisiting. He didn't need recognition. He had already won something deeper. Truth had stood the test of time. Respect had echoed farther than rage ever could. And Marcus? He had become more than the man in that courtroom. He had become the quiet symbol of what happens when character speaks louder than status, and never stops speaking.